Interesting comparison. We have the new iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. As you probably know, the best of the best from each brand, the most expensive, the best processor, best cameras. But of course, each one has its own strengths, each one has its own weaknesses. In fact, the main weakness on the iPhone 16 Pro is in fact its main new feature, in this case, the camera control. We'll talk about it later, but I can tell you I am very disappointed with this new feature. And well, that being said, let's begin by talking about the exterior design. In this case, the S24 Ultra has a very familiar design. We have almost the same design from the S23 and S22 Ultra. I think the only difference is that the side bezels are a little flatter as opposed to those other older phones, which makes it on paper a little bit more comfortable to hold. But I think that really depends on who you ask. Some people think it's better, some people think it's worse. And of course, we have the signature 90-degree corners, which can be very good for consuming media like movies or playing games. But of course, it can also be kind of uncomfortable if you try to put it in your pocket with tight jeans or if you try to use it with one hand. Now, something that I really like about the design on the S24 is that it comes included with the S Pen, which is a very premium tiny pen that you can use to type notes and, well, do a lot more things. A lot of people seem to believe that it only takes quick notes, but it does a lot more. If you tap and hold, it opens the camera. You can actually take a picture. You can even control other settings like, flipping between cameras like this. I'm not going to get into all the features of the S Pen because I could be talking about 30 minutes, but it is a very, very complete tool. And on the other hand, we get the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which, as you can see, it is also very similar to the old phones. It's almost identical to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. The only difference is that now it is a little bit bigger. It goes from 6.7 inches to 6.9 inches, which makes it, I think, the biggest iPhone ever. And it is getting to that point where it is also, like the S24, uncomfortable to use with one hand, uncomfortable to put on a pocket. But on the other hand, it is also a brilliant, awesome device to watch movies or to play games on because it has such a big display. Now, of course, I cannot tell you which one is better. I think it comes down to personal preference. Some people seem to think the squared design on the S24 Ultra is better. Some other people think the curvy design on the iPhone is better. In my personal opinion, they are both beautiful, and I couldn't even choose a winner. And I'm not afraid of choosing winners here. You'll see it throughout the video, but when it comes to the design, I genuinely don't know which one is better looking. I think they are both beautiful. Now, that being said, there is an aspect of the phones where I can clearly declare a winner. The S24 Ultra has a clearly better display. It has more brightness with 2600 nits instead of 2000 nits on the iPhone. It has a higher resolution with 1440p instead of 1300p on the iPhone. And last but definitely not least, I'm not sure if you can appreciate, well, you probably can appreciate the difference. The S24 Ultra has an anti-reflective coating that reduces glares and reflections of the sun or bright lights, which may not seem like a big deal here in the studio. You could just turn the phones a little bit and they'll look the same. But I can tell you, I can vouch from experience, when you're trying to use the phone in the summer at 12 a.m. and the sun is hitting right into the display, this anti-reflective coating can be the difference between being able to use the phone comfortably and having to go indoors or, turning the brightness all the way up to be able to see what's on your phone. Now, there is one thing though where the iPhone is a little bit better than the S24 Ultra, and that is in terms of screen to body ratio. This year, they've reduced the side frames a little bit more. They had greatly reduced the frames with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, but they said, you know what? Let's do it again. And they have reduced them even more, 30% more to be specific, making for the world record for best screen to body ratio on any 4, I think with 92%. Now, if you compare it to the S24 Ultra, as you can see, the difference is not really that noticeable. You can barely tell that the bezel is thinner on the iPhone 16 Pro. What is a little bit better on the iPhone is performance. The iPhone 16 Pro has the A18 Pro chip, which is the fastest mobile chip in the world, and the S24 Ultra has the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3. If we do the Geekbench CPU test, as you can see, the iPhone has a noticeably higher score, and that even though technically it doesn't correlate to real life necessarily, I do believe that this big of a difference, it is almost double on the single core score, has to make, even if it's a little difference on real life performance. That being said though, I've been doing some testing, opening apps, little casual phone games or more demanding games like Genshin Impact or Call of Duty. And in most of the apps, I haven't really noticed that big of a difference between the two. I think the only noticeable difference was when I played Genshin Impact, which is a little bit smoother and it plays a little bit better on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. But as for now, in 2024, there is, as I said, no noticeable performance difference between the two. I think what this means is that you are going to get a slightly better performance in the future, in 5, 6, 7 years, with the iPhone because of this extra bit of performance on paper on the processor. Now, something that I didn't appreciate is that both phones get very warm when I played 3D games at max settings for a while. And as I said, this happens to both the iPhone and the S24 Ultra. They got up to, I think, 45 degrees Celsius, which is this much Fahrenheit for those of you who are from the US. I was kind of disappointed. I didn't think this caliber of phones, high-end phones, would be so bad at retaining a decent temperature that's usable, because at that temperature, it's not even, you can't even hold it in your hand because it almost burns. Now, that being said, let's move on to what is usually the most controversial part of these comparisons, which is the operative system. Of course, I cannot declare a winner between Android or iOS. It all comes down to your personal preference as a user. But what I can say is that this year is a very special year, is the year of AI. Most phones have included AI features on their phones. And well, that is also the biggest difference between these two. The S24 Ultra has AI features available for every user on the planet, and the iPhone 16 Pro doesn't. With Samsung's phone, we can access Circle to Search, which basically does a smart search of anything you circle on your display, giving you the most relevant information. You can summarize or reformat any text to any style you want, depending on the person you are going to send the text to. And you also have magic editing features for your photos. So for example, if you want to make something disappear, you can, with 2 taps, make it disappear. As you can see, even if it's not perfect, it does a very convincing job, and it is only going to get better as time goes by. Now, a lot of these features that I've shown you on the S24 will also be available on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, but keyword will be available. At the time that I'm making this video, none of these features are available. There's no AI features for the iPhone 16 Pro Max. I think people in the US are going to get it next month in October, but people like me from Europe are probably going to see these features well into 2025, maybe even later, depending on how well Apple gets along with regulators, because that's the thing. They didn't even give a date for Europe or for the US. They just said in the fall with no specific date or anything. So yeah, it was kind of disappointing, and that makes a big difference between the S24 Ultra and the iPhone. As I said, I'm not going to get into which one is better. It depends on personal preference, but there is a big difference, and it's that one of them has AI features, the other doesn't. So I think I'm going to give the point to the S24 Ultra. Now, when it comes to the battery, they are both very, very close. We have 5,000 milliamp hours on the S24. We have 4,600 on the iPhone 16 Pro. But as many of you know, I think Apple usually gets a little bit more juice out of those milliamp hours because of their extra optimization. So results based on my testing have been very, very close. I've also seen other people's comparisons like Mr. Who's the Boss and other YouTubers. And it seems like when you compare both with very intensive apps, the iPhone has a slight advantage. And when you compare both with casual apps like social media or video calls, the S24 has a slight advantage. But On average, they both have amazing battery life. You can get 2 days out of the phones if you're not a super intensive user, and no matter what you do, you will get a day, a full day from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, even if you use it all the time. But anyways, that being said, let's move on to what's probably the most interesting part of the comparison for a lot of you, the camera comparison. This year, both phones are surprisingly close when it comes to camera features, but there is also some noticeable difference between the two, like the S24 Ultra having 200 megapixels instead of 48 on the iPhone, the S24 Ultra being able to record 8K video instead of 4K on the iPhone, and probably the most notable, the fact that the S24 Ultra has a third camera that the iPhone doesn't have. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras and the sensor, and on the iPhone we have 1, 2, 3 cameras and the sensor. So yeah, let's get a little bit more in depth into each one of those three differences. But first, and this is not a comparison because they both have the feature, I wanted to quickly mention that both phones can now record 4K video up to 120 Hertz, meaning 4K slow-mo video. And I wanted to say this because it's very impressive. Very few cameras have the option to do 4K slow-mo, and the fact that you can now access something like this on your phone, as I said, is very impressive. But anyways, that being said, let's begin with the differences. As I said, the S24 Ultra has 200 megapixels on the main camera, as opposed to 48 on the iPhone. And the differences when it comes to photo quality when you use the maximum resolution on both phones are a little bit of a hit or miss. Sometimes with perfect lighting conditions on daytime when you're outside, there is a clear noticeable improvement when it comes to resolution and detail on the S24 as opposed to the iPhone. The 200 megapixels make the photos look noticeably more detailed, especially when you zoom in. The problem here is that a lot of times these results are not consistent. Sometimes you get the same level of sharpness from the 248 megapixel photos, and some other times, especially when you take pictures at night, you can get a slightly softer photo on the Samsung phone with 200 megapixels, I think caused by the slightly smaller pixels because, you know, the more megapixels, the smaller the pixels, so that less light comes into each pixel and the more processing the phone has to do. I think that's the technical explanation. Then, as I said, the S24 Ultra can record 8K video as opposed to 4K on the iPhone. And here I saw a little bit more consistent results. It seems like 8K is noticeably sharper than 4K, even if it's a little bit, because on phones with such small sensors, it is hard to notice. I'm not really sure if you are able to see the difference on a YouTube video with all the compression, but I was able to see it zooming in on my computer. Unless, everything said, I took those videos indoors or at night when lighting conditions are less than ideal. Then the difference diminishes more and more and more as less light comes into the sensor until the results are almost identical or completely identical. Now, probably the biggest difference, as I said, is that the S24 Ultra has a fourth camera as opposed to the iPhone. And here I've seen very, very big differences. You have to consider that if you want to take a 3x photo or a moderately zoomed in photo, on the S24 Ultra, we get a dedicated sensor so we can get full resolution, full detail. And on the iPhone, we are actually cropping in from the 2x mode, which is also a crop from the 1x mode. So you're using the 1x camera to take a 3x photo. That, of course, on the process of zooming in, loses a lot of resolution, a lot of detail. And also the aspect ratio of the photo doesn't match the look because it's a 1x sensor with a crop for a 3. Technical camera stuff, but it does look weird when it comes to the aspect ratio of everything. So yeah, this is probably the biggest difference between the two phones. You can get amazing mid-zoom photos on the S24 Ultra, and on the iPhone, it is not really that good looking. I would actually recommend for you to take 1x photos or then all the way up to 5x to get the best quality. Now, as I said earlier, there is actually a new camera feature on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. The new camera control button that if you tap it once activates the camera, and if you tap it again can take a photo or a video, but that also as I said earlier, has also been kind of disappointing. Not because of the features that I just showed you, like quickly accessing the camera and quickly taking a picture. Those features are fine, but there is actually another feature you can access with the camera control, and it's that if you lightly press on the button, you can access a contextual menu to access, well, all the functionalities you had with the touch controls before, but instead of using the touch controls, you can swipe between the modes with the touch sensitivity on the button and do the same things pretty much, but with another way to do it. It's not faster, it's not better, it's not more convenient, it's just different. And even then, that's fine. If you don't like using the quick controls, you can always go back to the touch controls and it's not a big deal. The problem is that this quick access for the features is very, very, very inconvenient when you're trying to take normal photos and videos with the touch controls. If you are gripping the phone and you happen to have one of your fingers laid on top of the camera control, it just takes a little bit of extra force, a little bit of more grip to activate it, and then automatically it deletes all the other controls, touch controls. And even worse, if you want to swipe it away, you end up swiping the touch controls too. So if you're taking a photo and you accidentally tap it and you want to swipe it away, then all of a sudden you are on video mode and you have to swipe back. And if you forget, it can lead to problems like going from video to cinematic mode. You end up taking a completely different video than the one you wanted to take because of these annoying accidental triggers of the camera control button. It may seem like a stupid complaint, but I promise, the day that I went out to take pictures and videos to compare both phones, I accidentally triggered it like 20 times. It was awful. The first thing that I did when I came back home was browse on YouTube to see if there was any way that I could disable the button. I was ready to get rid of the quick access to the camera, which is fine, I like it, just so I didn't accidentally trigger the menu, the camera control menu, every time that I gripped the phone with a little extra force. Now, fortunately, there is a way you can disable the light press without disabling the hard press, and it's here on accessibility. If you tap on camera control, you can disable show adjustments, and if you do so, you still have access to the quick camera launching, and you can take a picture by tapping on the button, but you don't really have the option to grip, and you don't get the menu. That's annoying. You get the basic touch controls you've always had, and that is unfortunately the way that I am going to be using the iPhone 16 Pro. And I say unfortunately because, as I said at the beginning of the video, this is the main headline feature for this phone. It's supposed to be the reason you spend money on it. So the fact that I had to deactivate it is very depressing in a way. Like, you spend so much money on this phone and you end up deactivating the very reason you bought it. But anyways, I don't want you to leave with a sour taste. I do think the iPhone 16 Pro is an amazing device. So is the S24 Ultra. And it is very hard for me to pick a winner this time because they are both very, very close. As I said, the biggest difference between the two is probably the operating system, excluding AI, just, iOS versus Android. And that's probably the reason why most people are going to choose one or the other. But if I get technical, I think I would have to go for the S24. I mean, technically on paper, it has a better display, it has better cameras, and when it comes to battery and processor, they are both identical. And they both have very good prices on Amazon. I left links for both down below in the description with the best prices that I found on the internet. And now that the video is about to end, I recommend you go take a look.